Good evening, everybody. This is the meeting of the Valley Stream Book Club. It's March 31st, 2026. We are here to discuss the book Lauryn Harper Falls Apart by the author Shauna Robinson. I'm very pleased that Shauna is going to be joining us today. She's written a number of books, and this is her fourth. Um, I picked it up because when I was going through it, it seemed very interesting. And I was just telling her it was a feel-good book for me. And I'm on sometimes on a lot of stress, so it was nice to pick up a book that I could read a few chapters and have a good feel, go to bed. Okay, so that's enough about that. So Shauna, would you like to tell us a little about yourself, and then we'll open it to questions and a discussion.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me, and everyone, thank you for joining. It's really nice to have this time with you all. So my name is Shauna Robinson, and I'm the author of Lauryn Harper Falls Apart. This is my fourth novel, which came out last year. And I think in general, I just really like writing feel good books, as you said. That's such a good way to put it. I just like writing books with humor and charm and silliness. I really like writing, like injecting silliness and humor into the books that I write, and always makes me happy to make people laugh. And I'm based in Richmond, Virginia, and I have been writing fiction since like middle school. I have not been writing good fiction since middle school, but writing is just something I love doing. And my first book came out 4 years ago, which is wild to think about. But it's just been a lovely journey, and I've really enjoyed just spending time with readers and chatting books with people from all over the country.
So if your first book came out 4 years ago, I would think that unless you're a really, really fast writer, you've had some of these in the back burner for a while.
I guess I'm a fast writer. I so my first book that came out was like the first like novel I'd ever written, and I was very fortunate to have an experience where some of the first queries I sent, I got agent interest from agents, and this was in like summer of 2020, and which was a wild time for us all, I'm sure. And then after my first book, my publisher offered me a two-book deal for my first book. So my first book, and then a second book that didn't exist yet. And I am like an overachiever who worries a lot. And so summer of 2020, as soon as I got that book deal, I was like, okay, well, I need to write my second book. And so I told no one about it, and I just started writing it. And luckily, it turned out to be something they were interested in, which is not often the case. Um, and yeah, I think and then over time I've just started writing my books faster and faster because I I find writing just kind of very stressful when you're in it, because I feel like I'm still getting to know the world, I'm still getting to know the characters, and so I just want to get like a draft out as fast as I can so that I can spend all my time on revising it and making it better now that I like know the characters more, now that I know the world. So that's more of my happy place.
Is your background in writing?
So I did go major in English for college. Um, there was like a very brief sliver of time where I was like, maybe I'll do pre-med because I was watching a lot of Grey's Anatomy, and I was like, you know what, maybe I could be a surgeon. But I like literally, I think the first few days of freshman year, I I like signed up for chemistry, but I was on a wait list for an English course I wanted to be part of. And then when I got off the wait list for English, I was like, this is a sign. And I dropped out of chemistry before I even attended a class, just because writing had always come really naturally to me. I love reading. I love writing. And so I just felt like even though I didn't know what I wanted to do with my like life or what I would do with an English degree, I just felt like I should go all in on that. And then from there, I ended up working in publishing after I graduated from college. And it was not like fun, exciting publishing fiction and the next great American novel. It was working in publishing for like a publisher that published nonfiction professional development materials for like teachers and professors and business people, which was not super exciting to me as a 22-year-old. But I mean, it was still interesting. And the people I think you meet in a lot of bookish spaces, whether that's publishing or libraries or bookstores, are just some of like the friendliest, kindest, smartest people around. So that was just really nice to still make some lifelong friends and learn the ropes of the working world anyway.
If anyone has any questions, please feel free to chip in. Um, so are your characters based on your people you know? I mean, or are they all figments of your imagination?
That is a good question. So if I were not being honest with myself, I would say, oh my goodness, they are all just figments of my imagination. I made them all up. But like I have to be truthful. So like I think a lot of people's first novels, the main characters like often kind of them or a thinly veiled version of them. And like for my first novel, I'm reluctant to admit, but that was the case. Like it's about a young woman who's working in publishing and really jaded about it. Who does that sound like? And then for my second book, I went in like complete opposite direction. I was like, I'll show them. I can write about someone who's not me, and I just wrote about someone who's like my exact opposite. And like she was a huge extrovert, and I'm like the world's biggest introvert. And so in a way, I feel like that was kind of basing it on me. If I'm just thinking about who's me and then what's the opposite of that. But then for my next few books, including Lauryn Harper Falls Apart, it's more that I do feel like I'm kind of creating a character who's all her own, but I do like maybe take a little bit from myself in each character. And so for Lauren, the thing that I drew from is the fact that I'm like fully deaf in my right ear, which can lead to like some like awkward situations. And so a lot of that stuff that Lauren goes through is pretty similar with me, where I feel like there's a limit to the number of times I can ask someone to repeat themselves before it gets really awkward or they just give up on repeating themselves. And so that was really fun to write about because it's not often, at least that I feel like I've come across a character who's deaf in one ear and goes through the same kind of silly, awkward things I go through. So yeah, I think now that I've kind of gotten the hang of writing characters, my main characters usually like kind of become their own person, but I'll like inject like a little something of myself to have fun with.
Well,
I
I
enjoy
like that it was a, oh, sorry, Carolyn, go ahead.
that. No, go ahead, Debbie.
Um, I was just going to say, I love the fact that, and I think we've all experienced this where you're, best friends with someone when you're younger and then you kind of go your own separate ways. But it was nice that they reconnected, even though there was a little awkwardness there. And I think we've all been through all that, but it was such a good story. And that part of it was very interesting.
Aw, yeah, I'm so glad that resonated with you because I feel like that's something I think about a lot. Like recently decided to torture myself by like digitizing my old diaries. And so I was literally just like flipping through every single page of my middle school diary and like taking a photo, scanning it with my phone, every single page. And like friendships are so intense, like when you're young, and just that feeling like, oh, we're gonna be best friends forever. And so, as you drift away and as life happens, there is always just like that special place in our hearts for all those people we were like best friends with at one point in time. And so it was really fun to, write about revisiting that. And I'm glad that resonated with you.
The part that resonated with me was the fact that so many people have a dream and they have a dream of what their career is going to be like and what their life is going to be like and they work towards that and they work towards that long after it has ceased to be a reality or realistic. And though I found Lauren a little frustrating because it took her a while to get to that point, she finally realized this isn't really my dream anymore, and I've got to pivot. I've got to think a different way, and I've got to do something got to do something different.
Yeah. I mean that is I feel like my whole life just feels like it's been one pivot to another. Like there was a point in time when I was like my dream was to work in publishing and then I no longer was and I had to pivot. And yeah, I feel like I am often trying to collect stories from people of like what did you want to do and what are you doing now and how did you pivot? Partly because it's interesting, but partly because I feel like there's so much I want to learn from them. Um, is did pivoting is something you've done in your own life?
Um, I think I have, but not consciously.
Mm-hmm.
Not consciously. I mean, you come to a fork in the road and you take a particular path or you reach a roadblock and then you just make the best decision you can. I can only think about the pivots if I sort of think retrospectively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
That's funny. You talked about when you went to college. When I went to college, I thought I was going to be I was in my high school. I was like an editor of the school newspaper. So here I was going to go to college, take the English classes, and I was going to become a journalist. After like the first English class, I did not do well. That kind of killed that. It was just they concentrated more on English literature, the literature, and I wanted to be a writer. So that I had to pivot away from that. So, you start out as a young person going to college and you think that you have well, some people feel like they know what they're going to do, and it changes like really very quickly.
Yeah. And I feel like it's also like that's how we learn more about ourselves too. Because like when you mentioned wanting to be a journalist, like there was also a period when I wanted to, which I think again was influenced by the TV I watched. I also watched a lot of Gilmore Girls, and Rory Gilmore wanted to be a journalist. And I joined my high school newspaper. And then I quickly learned that like, oh, I am not at all interested in writing about real things in real life. Like I just want to write fiction. But that's an experience I wouldn't have had, or I wouldn't have known that had I not done that. And so then that was how I still went on to join my college newspaper, but as a copy editor because I really, really love like grammar and correcting grammar. But I mean, it's just that's how I learned. How else are we going to know?
But there are many people who live their lives just pursuing that initial dream. They never pivot, and then they're in their 50s and 60s and they're miserable.
Yeah, I know that's so scary to think about.
It is scary.
So, and, sometimes there are economic reasons why you don't make the choice.
Yeah.
Like Lauren had no choice. This was put upon her, and she had to go. uh, but some people can't adjust and make that change, and the others now that had been like sort of exiled there,
Mm.
yeah, they they were just like sort of content being exiled. So I just found them to all to be such interesting characters, though. They ended up having like personalities, and she just brought out the uniqueness of each of them.
Hmm.
Yeah, I like personally, I super related to the folks at the Riser Cares office because I was like, you get paid to do nothing, like that's the dream, and it's great that Lauren helps them realize the value and potential they have or whatever. But I personally feel like I would have been content just hanging out and playing air hockey and doing nothing.
Yeah, they all seem very happy just hanging out and not doing anything. What was one of them was crocheting, one of them was watching reality shows. But then, like once she started, when Lauren started with the Apple Festival, they kind of couldn't help themselves.
Yeah.
Like each of them, you found out what their expertise was and how they really got drawn back into it.
Yeah.
I think all those years when they were there, it was like they were in a holding pattern.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And they just needed something to get them moving again. Did that mustard
The mustard
incident,
flood.
did that ever happen someplace? Is that totally your figment of imagination?
Okay, I'm so glad you brought that up because that is like my favorite thing about this book. Because it's just so silly. Um, so it to my knowledge, there has never been a mustard flood in real life. However, I was inspired by like the Boston molasses flood, and there is an entire Wikipedia page dedicated to like non-water floods. And so there has been like a beer flood, a wine flood, there was like a cheese fire, a butter and cheese fire, which I don't understand. Um, but my editors, when I initially like mentioned the idea of the mustard flood, they're like, huh, hmm, maybe that's a little too silly though. And at that point, that was kind of all I was clinging to because that for I think this book idea, like I'd initially come to them with an idea and they passed on it, and then I sent them another idea and they're like, okay, but what if you took out these things and added these things? And that kind of sent me into a spiral of trying to figure out how to make that work. And the thing that made it all work ended up being the mustard flood. And so when they kind of were hesitant about the mustard flood, it was like all of my sanity is hinging upon a mustard flood. Please let me have this. And I'm happy to say that after they read the first draft, they were like, you know what, dude, take back everything we said. This works. So that is my long-winded way of saying that. No, there has not been one in real life, but it is very interesting to read about the like real life food floods that have happened. And if those if those can happen in real life, then why can't this small town have a mustard flood?
I have read about like certain towns where there's this only one industry. I think there was a Krispy Kreme place in the northeast that the smell was just overwhelming the town. And but that was the identity of the town. So it's like a mixed bag there. This makes your town, but it's also you have to live with it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that also makes me think of people who like have apartments above like certain restaurants or something where like it smells amazing, but then over, eventually they get tired of it or it just makes them want to eat all the time. I don't know, definitely like pros and cons for sure.
The other element that resonated with me was her hearing loss. Because I too have a hearing loss. I'm hearing hearing aids now. And so I know exactly what it feels like before you start wearing hearing aids, for example, and you don't want to admit that you can't hear people. And then even when you're wearing hearing aids, you still can't hear people. And even your friends get tired of repeating things after a while.
I know it's a shame. I feel like I've kind of bullied them into like it at this point. But yeah, the whole thing can be frustrating. And I remember I didn't realize like how much I relied on like reading lips until like COVID and
Mhm.
people started wearing masks. Because I was never like trained to lip read or anything. But if it's loud and I have really like I didn't realize, but I've really gotten by just like watching the way people like form words with their mouths and then kind of putting context clues together into what they were saying. Yeah, so I'm glad you related to that. There are so many like weird small things when it comes to hearing loss.
And accents I find particularly challenging. And in New York, there are just tons and tons of accents, and they can be really challenging.
Oh yeah, definitely, especially if it's not one that you're like familiar with.
You're not
Like
attuned to, yeah.
yeah, like my mother is from Australia, and so she has an Australian accent, and so that is kind of like second nature to me. But for a lot of other ones, yeah, it's gonna be challenging if it's not something you're
Mhm.
you're used to.
So you must like dogs.
Oh, I love.
On your bookcase.
I have two dog books. I have a dog downstairs, and that was like my entire like life's wish and purpose was to have a dog. I wasn't allowed to have one growing up. Um, and so every birthday wish for like my entire life was like, I wish I could have a dog. And then once I kind of, graduated from college and got a job and my own apartment and everything, I still didn't feel like I was in a position to adopt one because I didn't want it to just be home alone while I was working. But 6 years ago, 6.5 years ago, my husband and I adopted our first dog, a greyhound, and he's perfect. And he's like a retired racer who never actually raced because they tried him out on the racetrack in Florida, and they're like, nope, you do not have what it takes. And so that's been lovely. He did not like when we would have to go to work, but then 3 months after we got him, the COVID lockdown happened, and we both ended up just working from home forever. And so I feel like he feels like we just like took his feedback into consideration. Like he was like, I don't like when you go to work. And we're like, you know what? We respect that. We will never do that again.
Do you feel like the any of the characters from your book could be like have a spin-off? Because I felt like some of them had something more than just being her like foil. It was not enough.
Yeah, I never thought about that. Like sometimes people have asked me about like, oh, like, would you ever write a sequel for this book or something? And I've always been like, oh no, I feel like the story's over. But I've never thought about what character could have a spin-off. I'm going to have to think about that. I'm sure in some way there is, but I also that's kind of a compliment you saying that because I feel like when I'm writing a first draft, I don't have their characters fully fleshed out yet. They do feel like, oh, this character only exists to be this foil, and this character only exists to do this thing. And so it's kind of over several drafts that I layer in those like other character traits and journeys. And I always like hope I did like a good enough job to make them feel kind of fully fleshed out, but I never really know if that's the case. And so that's nice to hear.
The mayor that hates people.
Yes, my king. You know, what's kind of bad is that at the time, again, because I'm drafting, I'm really not putting much thought into the first draft. So at the time, I just named him after my real life mayor here in Richmond. At the time, we had Mayor Stoney. So I just called him Mayor Stoney. And then like the second draft, I was like, I can't write like fan fiction about a real life person in my novel. And so I changed it. But I gave it a name that, ends in Y as like a nod to the fact that he was first named after Richmond's mayor. But yeah, I always love having like a major introvert character because I am a major introvert. And so, but Mayor Bradley is a lot, I think, braver and bolder than I am with his introversion. Like I feel still an intense social pressure to like be polite, and so I would not like say really like make a big show out of setting my watch for 2 hours for a social event and then ditching as soon as it goes off. But that's the dream.
You said your mother was Australian. Did you grow up in the United States? Because the small town vibe is, like I think you captured that. So if you grew up in Australia, it would be very different. So I'm just curious about that.
Oh yeah, no, I grew up in here in the United
Oh,
States,
okay.
in Southern California. I spent most of my childhood in San Diego, which is definitely not a small town. But again, everything just comes back to the TV I watch. I love TV. So I grew up watching, as I said, Gilmore Girls, which is like the idyllic small town setting. And so I think that put in my head, like, oh my God, small towns, just a bit of an obsession with them. But with my second novel, The Banned Bookshop of Maggie Banks was like sort of my idyllic small town novel. And then for this one, I had been planning to set it in like, Richmond. But my publisher said they really wanted to see a small town. And I didn't want to do the same thing I'd done before with like a small town where everything is perfect. And so that was why I wanted to do like a small town that's kind of like falling apart a little bit and kind of doing their best. I'll make another TV reference. So I was sort of inspired by like Pawnee and Parks and Recreation. It's just kind of everyone's doing their best, but it's not perfect by any means. And yeah, so having never actually grown up in a small town, I just tried my best to like do research and see what, you know, challenges they're facing, and incorporate that into the book so that I could add like maybe a touch of realism into my strange mustard flood book.
You sound like you watched a lot of TV.
Yeah.
Well, you know, obviously, some of the series that you mentioned, I mean, they still have a following. So there are shows that they're not like flash in the pan, like, you know, some of these other shows. People are still watching Gilmore Girls and those type of shows.
Yeah, the local bookstore near me just did like someone came out with a Gilmore Girls book, and so they just did a Gilmore Girls trivia event that I missed, but I feel like it's probably for the best that I missed it because I would have crushed it on account of how many times I've rewatched it. So I feel like it's healthiest that I did not go.
It reminded me a bit of many Hallmark movies. Hallmark movies are almost always set in very small towns. And if there had been a romantic interest for her, and they're also usually people who are rallying around, you know, bringing back the Christmas show and, you know,
Yeah,
bringing back the Apple Festival. There was a
and the
Hallmark
character
element to it.
and the main character often is like a super busy business lady with just
Yes.
like Lauren is. Yeah, I totally see the Hallmark vibes.
And they have to raise money.
Of course, that is important.
Yeah, so she
Have
just really needed a romantic element.
yeah, that's all it was missing. Has anyone read As Seen on TV by Meredith Shore? Because that one it kind of takes that Hallmark trope and like turns it on its head. And
Mhm.
so she like this woman hears about like some developer coming into a small town to like I don't remember like build condos or something, and she is like, oh my god, well according to every Hallmark movie I've ever seen, they're like this is bad and we need to like rally up and protect the town. And then she gets to town and everyone's like, no, we love this is gonna like bring jobs and this is gonna bring like life into this town. And so it's just kind of her constantly going around and being disappointed that small town life is not like the Hallmark tropes that
Mhm.
she expected. So I think it's always really fun when you find like works that kind of like are like a fun little nod to things we love.
So you are not doing a sequel to this, but you are writing another book already?
Uh,
Are
no,
you taking a break?
yeah, let's call it a break. I would love to be writing a book, but I don't like I don't know what to write about right now. Like I I don't have like that idea yet, and so I am just flailing and fumbling. And hopefully though, I have decided, you know what? Today is the last day of like the first quarter of the year. And because you know Lauren measures her life in quarters, so why can't I? And maybe Q2 is the quarter in which I stop flailing and I find inspiration for the next book that I'm gonna write. If we're gonna be hopeful about it, which we are today, we're gonna be hopeful.
Well, you said you you know, you digitized your diaries. There could be a lot of good things in your diaries. You just
You know, thinking that you know that's oh god, this is even more embarrassing because I've already told you how obsessed I am with TV, but it shows because the very first page of my middle school diary, I wrote this in sixth grade, was just me ranking the characters from Friends. I ranked the men from cutest to least cute, and I ranked the women from prettiest onwards, and then I ranked them in intelligence, and then I went into a very detailed recap of what happened in the episode of Friends I just saw, and then a detailed recap into what was going to happen in next week's episode according to the preview that I watched. It's I don't know why that was a thing that like compelled me in sixth grade to be like, I have to write this down. I have to start this diary, and this is going to be page one. But I was an interesting child, it seems.
Are you still writing like diaries, or you have to stop? You stop that?
I feel like I went through phases of like doing it and not doing it. So like I did it like throughout middle school and high school, didn't really do it in college. But then in the last few years, I started back like every single day, mostly because my friend was using this app called Day One to journal in, and it kind of has a unique structure because it will say like, oh, a year ago today, here's what you wrote, and 2 years ago today, here's what you wrote, and I was like, that sounds kind of cool. I want to do that. And so in 2023, I started doing that. And it's been, so I like haven't missed a day since then. And it's been really fun to just like a year ago today, 2 years ago today. And also like, I can like influence my past self influences my future self. Like I'll be like, oh, a year ago today, I baked brownies. Well, now I'm going to bake brownies. And so that'll be like, oh, a year ago today you baked brownies. 2 years ago today you also baked brownies. And 3 years ago today you wrote about how you wanted brownies. But I swear I write about things other than baked goods. But yeah, it's been really, really, I think like I'm tapping back into a part of myself by returning to journaling. But I also like was wondering similarly when you brought up me digitizing my diaries, how maybe there's a book in there. I feel like that could inspire me. So I do want to go back to that too. I just have not been able to summon the courage to digitize my high school diary because that was like so embarrassing. I feel like it's like the whole thing is just me being like, I'm sad. I want a boyfriend. I'm sad. I want a boyfriend. And I just can't bear to go through that for 200 pages. But one day I will, and maybe there will be some inspiration in there.
That thing that you were saying about the journaling and telling you what you did a year ago. I mean, before COVID, I was not on Facebook, and now like we've been on, I'm on it. I'm not into any of the other social media, but every once in a while they tell you what you were doing, like the beginning of COVID, and I said, "Wow, we have gone so far since then." But I said, "Oh wow, that was when I was like stuck at home," and so that concept of sort of the past keeps like sneaking up on you
Yeah.
when when you least expect it, because it doesn't do it all the time. It just does it every once in a while. And what they sometimes I highlight, that was what you were doing 5 years ago, 4 years ago. It was really very unimportant.
uh, and then in other ways, I feel like it does kind of be like, I don't know, like maybe like I think there have been times when 2 years ago today I was like working on a puzzle and I was really into it. And I'll write about, oh, I really love listening to this audiobook while doing this puzzle. And then it's just kind of a reminder like, oh, I want to do that again because like that was really fun. And so it is kind of a nice way to also be reminded of like things you love doing but haven't really returned to, or maybe goals you had but haven't really worked towards, as well as reminders of how many brownies I eat.
You had said that so if you've been writing very quickly then, so this is like a really downtime for you, not writing something else. Uh,
Um,
how is your agent taking this? Or do you have an agent that, or,
yeah, so every time I would get a notification for a new email, I would just like have a moment of worry that it's like my agent being like, "Hey girl, what's going on? What you doing?" But we communicate, and she knows I'm like working on something, and I also like have a day job, and so she gets that I have like other things going on. She is also like agenting is her job, and she is an author as well on the side. So I feel like she's she kind of gets it. Um, but I do like have like always that like the overachiever in me has that fear in the back of my mind, like, oh, what if one day she drops me? And I mean that would be justified because I'm not doing anything right now. But that. I mean, I know realistically that that's not how it actually goes.
well, you're not going to be a one book wonder. So since you've already written four,
Yeah, at least I have that.
And you did them very quickly.
Yeah.
So are you you said you do work on the rough draft, and then is it like editing, um, or do you feel pretty confident, or do you have what was I say? Once you start, do you know what the end is going to be, or is it
Oh yeah, it's
comes
a
about later?
yeah. So I used to be more of that philosophy of like I would get an idea and then I would be like, oh, but I should really outline it. And then I would only get like halfway through outlining it and be like, you know what, I'll figure it out as I write. But then that kind of just led to once I reached that point where I didn't have it figured out when I was writing, that would just lead to me kind of being stuck and flailing and not really like being sure what I was doing, and that would kind of eat up time into the writing process. And so for my third book, my publisher like requested that I like an outline of everything to ever happen in the book before I start writing. And that was kind of scary for me because I started outlining and then I reached the point halfway through where I was like, I don't know what happens from here. But I couldn't put that in the outline and submit it. And so I actually had to, I checked a book out of the library called like How to Outline Your Novel. And that had some helpful tips and ideas. Like one of them was, make a list of like every single thing that could possibly happen, and maybe something will inspire you from there. Just kind of things like that, like, hey, maybe don't give up. What a concept. And so that was my first kind of experience like writing a fully fleshed out outline. And then it amazed me how much easier the drafting phase was because of it, because I never had a moment of being stuck. I wrote the book so quickly, because I always knew what was going to happen next. um, and it also helped that my outline was like super detailed. I think it was like 10 to 12 pages or something, because I was just trying to put in like as much detail as I could. And so I followed that same process for Lauryn Harper Falls Apart as well, because it worked so well. And so again, it was like I spent a month writing the outline. So it was like January 1st, 2024, I started writing the outline. And again, just putting in as much detail as I could, thinking through things when I got stuck. And then February 1st, 2024, I started writing the book, and I finished it on February like 22nd or February 23rd. And I like, again, I just like, I had like very intense word count goals, like like I think for my previous book, for my third book, I had a goal of like write 1,000 words every weekday, and then like 5,000 over the course of the weekend. And then this time I just was like, you know what, that worked. So what if I doubled it? And so it became 2,000 words every weekday, and then I think like 7,000 over the weekend. And I also took off every other Friday, which helped too, just so I could spend my entire day focusing on writing. But yeah, so Lauryn Harper Falls Apart was the first draft was written in like 3 weeks. But then revising is again where like everything lives. And so I spent like a couple months revising it on my own. So I made like a few passes, 2 or 3, before I submitted it to my publisher. And then with the publisher, it goes through like 3 passes as well. But the most important part was just like having something to start with. There's that expression, you can't edit a blank page. And so it was really important to me to just get something down, and then it make it better later.
Over the past 4 years, when we've been doing these author visits, it's been very interesting to hear how different authors approach their writing. But you have been the fastest writer that we have ever um, talked with. I mean, one of them was just like it takes her like a year to get to this stage. So that's really, it's just so fascinating how every one of you takes a different approach. And I hope that is going to mean that you're going to be able to write soon. That little block,
You know,
I don't know if it's writer's block, your thinking block is going to go away.
Yeah, I hope so. But also like, yeah, it's wild how everyone has like a different process. And also, I know people who they take their time writing the first draft, but when the first draft is done, it's like a masterpiece and it doesn't need to go through like a million stages of edits that mine does. But also, other people have like way more responsibilities than I do. Like some authors I know like are parents, and I'm like, I don't understand how like you do anything at all in life, let alone like write books while like looking after kids or while caregiving. And yeah, it's just amazing that things people do in like the little pockets of time they may have just because they're so passionate about the thing they love.
You think you said that your experience in the publishing world was not writing, fiction, but you think it kind of helped you a little bit, to get moving on that?
So like I had such a different like experience, because like to the point where I did not know how like you get a book published when it's fiction, because coming from the nonfiction side, or at least at our like publisher that where I was just focused on books for professors, and so our authors were professors. We didn't do like really like advances, because professors just wanted to have a book published, they could put it on their CV. And we didn't, most of our authors didn't have agents. We were just kind of, the editors just kind of reach out to authors directly and be like, hey, you're an expert in this. Why don't you write a book? But it did get me, friends who are massive book lovers and who have hobbies of writing. And so my friend who I worked with in publishing, she went on to get a master's in creative writing, and then she like wrote a novel and was querying it to agents, and I had no idea what querying was or how that worked, but I like talked to her and I learned about it, and she was like one of the first people to read my first novel draft and suggest like some really important feedback, like, hey, maybe a book should have a plot, and suggest like writing resources. And she like shared with me the query she wrote for like that got her an agent, and that was really helpful. So like not so much like the job I had teaching me much about fiction publishing, but definitely like the friend that I made who also had a similar interest to me. And yeah, she got her, I think, first book published in 2020, which was amazing. But it's always just such a big help to have like other people in your corner who like know what they're doing and can kind of like help you along the way.
So you said you had a friend that was with, I guess on the same path as you. Do you find that you reaching out to other authors, or you don't want to get involved with anybody else in case plagiarism or something?
That's like it's been so like amazing to have like author community. So I like not big on social media at all, and so I only got a Twitter at the time, because there was a pitch contest that I wanted to like participate in to try to pitch my book. So like I literally just had like I think 3 followers, like my husband and my best friend and my author friend, and tried my best. But because of the power of like hashtags and the bookish community and authors kind of uplifting each other and supporting everyone's pitches, like my pitch tweet ended up in that event ended up getting a lot of traction, and I got like several offers from it, including from the agent who now represents me. And so other authors kind of like would reach out to me, and I would kind of respond to them. And so I was able to form like a really nice author community from that, which still is going strong today. But yeah, even as like a massive introvert, like I definitely need like my author community, because it's kind of like it's such like a specialized kind of industry in a way. And so there's not a lot of information out there about, what other authors are going through, like what you're supposed to do in this situation. And like when I try Googling it, like nothing comes up. So it's just been an immense help also. And, we're all going through different phases. Like I may have published more books than some, but other people have gotten like, really exciting things happen to their books and making like bestseller lists and stuff. And so we all have like different experiences, but a lot of common experiences as well, which has been just super, super helpful.
I know, are you worried about AI? Because,
Um,
the big thing about that book now that was pulled because they said that like more than 70% of it seemed to be AI generated.
Yeah, I am less worried in like the creative fiction sense because I feel like it's so easy to like, I don't know, easier to tell because there's so much heart in creative fiction. Like my day job, however, is like writing for like a company, kind of like case studies and white papers and things. And I feel like that corporate voice is a lot easier for AI to emulate. And so in my day job, I've had concerns where I'm like, oh, it's like if I needed to like look for another job, is anyone even going to hire like a writer when they could just like turn to AI instead? But for fiction, I mean, I guess like I haven't tried to read AI generated fiction to my knowledge, but I just feel like, I don't know, there's so much heart and soul in fiction that I'm not really all that concerned, but maybe I'm too naive.
Well, like it's coming, you have to be aware that it's there. But as you say, I just went to a, a webinar with someone who does helps people with their college applications, and the AI can generate a beautiful essay, but it's the heart and soul that the teenager has to put in there. And he basically said the AI cannot give the experience to write a really compelling essay. So I think that's what the thing with fiction is. You could probably get the words out there, but would it have any would it resonate with anybody? Not if it's just a computer just picking out the best thing. It's so I think you're safe.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that's good to know that that's kind of what someone else was conveying too. Yeah, and also like I can't imagine what it's like as a teacher, to have to deal with the possibility of students like using AI and like how would you know if it's just like for a rote like essay? Like I don't know. I feel like just the ways that it makes a lot of jobs more difficult in some ways. It's just so hard to imagine.
Well, they said that a lot of the schools now that back in the day we used to have these little books that we'd have to do our essays, write it. They're not letting them hand it in. They have to write. At least they're gonna have to write it themselves in the class. But now you have a whole generation that doesn't know how to write script, so they're printing out these things the best they can.
Whenever it's handwritten, it's written by a human.
Yeah, but like we sometimes we ask people to sign their name at the library, and the younger ones cannot sign their name. They just print all the letters together because they've never learned to write any kind of cursive. It's a big like if their name begins with a D, it's a big D and then the line because they can't figure out how to write the rest of their their name in cursive. We've seen a whole generation there who can't tell time on a clock. They really they're missing a lot of their education.
Always.
No, I appreciate the time you spent with us. Um, so we're not going to be looking for a book right away, even though you're a fast writer. But I will keep an eye on if something that comes up in the future. And but this was really an enjoyable book, and I'm glad that we got to meet you and talk to you.
Thank you so much. I love talking to you. I loved your questions. Thank you everyone for coming and sharing your experiences. This was so much fun to talk with you all.